On July 10, 1942, over the mist-shrouded wilderness of Akutan Island in the Alaskan Territory, the binoculars of machinist mate Albert Knack trembled as he peered through the PBY Catalina's observation window. Below, in the marshy grass, lay something that sent a jolt through every man aboard. A Japanese Zero fighter, upside down but remarkably intact, the red rising sun emblems unmistakable. Lieutenant William Thies, the Catalina's pilot, had wandered off course in heavy fog, reorienting by dead reckoning and crossing Akutan purely by chance. A flight path rarely used, one that would alter the course of the Pacific War. What Knack and Thies had stumbled upon seemed almost impossible. For over a year, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero had ruled the Pacific skies, shredding Allied air forces with unmatched speed and agility. From Pearl Harbor to the Philippines, Burma, and Malaya, it had outperformed every land-based fighter thrown against it. American pilots had been ordered not to dogfight the Zero. The mathematics were too grim. They were to avoid engagement entirely, to run rather than die trying to turn with it. The myth of the invincible Japanese fighter was absolute. But that myth began to crack on June 4, 1942, the same day as the Battle of Midway, when 19-year-old Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga launched from the carrier Ryujo to attack Dutch Harbor as part of Japan's diversionary Alaskan campaign. His Zero, serial number 4593, strafed American installations, shot down a Catalina, and turned to withdraw. But a bullet from the ground severed his oil line. His two wingmen, Makoto Endo and Tsuguo Shikata, escorted him as oil streamed from the cowling. Akutan Island, pre-designated by the Japanese as an emergency landing field, lay ahead, and Koga descended toward what appeared to be solid ground. But the grass hid a marsh. He lowered his landing gear, the wheels dug into the soft mud, and the Zero flipped forward, coming to rest upside down. Koga died instantly, his neck broken. His comrades circled helplessly. Orders demanded they destroy any crashed Zero, but unable to fire on their friend, they flew away, believing a rescue submarine would recover him. The sub never came. For a month, the wreck sat untouched, hidden by fog, until Knack's accidental sighting. The following day, Lieutenant Thies returned with a recovery team. Cautiously approaching the wreck, Chief Aviation Pilot William Score found Koga's body still strapped in the cockpit. The Americans buried him nearby with respect, recognizing a fellow airman, and then began examining the mysterious machine that had terrorized them for months. What they discovered was astonishing. The Zero was incredibly light, the skin thin and almost fragile. No armor behind the seat, no bulletproof glass, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Everything in its construction screamed one philosophy: sacrifice, protection for performance. American aircraft, designed to bring pilots home alive, carried heavy armor, thick glass, and self-sealing tanks that swelled shut when punctured. The Zero had none of that. It was a flying blade, built for agility, not survival. 3 attempts were needed to recover it from the marsh through brutal Alaskan weather. But by July 15th, the wreck reached the USS St. Mihiel and was shipped south, arriving in Seattle and then by barge to North Island Naval Air Station near San Diego. There, under armed guard to prevent souvenir hunters from dismantling it, Navy engineers began repairs. Expecting crude workmanship, they instead found a masterpiece of lightweight engineering. The Zero's aluminum alloy, Extra Super Duralumin, was advanced, its internal fittings minimalist, its structure bonded and optimized to save every pound. Fully loaded, it weighed just 5,555 pounds, nearly 2,000 less than the American F6F Wildcat. That weight difference, despite the Wildcat's greater horsepower, gave the Zero superior climb, range, and maneuverability. Yet it came at a deadly cost. Its fuel system was unprotected, its pilot entirely exposed. It was a perfection of offense and an abandonment of defense. By September 1942, the aircraft was flight-worthy again. Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders took the controls for its first American test flight, noting its astonishing responsiveness. Light, graceful, almost alive under his hands. It leapt into the air with barely any run. At low speeds, it could outturn anything he'd flown. But above 200 knots, the ailerons stiffened badly, making roll control sluggish. At higher speeds, it became clumsy, its agility vanishing. Then came a critical discovery. When Sanders pushed the stick forward to generate negative Gs, the Zero's engine cut out completely. Its carburetor relied on gravity, starving the engine of fuel in inverted flight. American fighters, with pressure carburetors, did not. That meant a new tactic. When a Zero was on your tail, don't turn. Push the stick forward, dive, and the enemy's engine would die while yours kept running. That revelation alone would save countless lives. Over 24 test flights, Sanders mapped every nuance of the aircraft's behavior. At low speed, it was untouchable. At high speed, vulnerable. The findings spread through Pacific squadrons, transforming tactics overnight. Commander John Thatch's Thatch Weave, developed earlier, was validated. Pairs of wildcats weaving toward each other, covering one another as the Zero tried to turn inside them. Boom and zoom tactics became standard. Dive, fire, and climb again. Never turn, never slow down. The Zero could now be beaten, not by matching its style, but by exploiting its flaws. The captured aircraft became a priceless training tool. At North Island, mock dogfights pitted it against every American fighter. Wildcats, P-38 Lightnings, P-40 Warhawks, each engagement taught new lessons about speed, roll rate, and dive performance. Pilots gained confidence. The myth of invincibility was shattered. As Marine ace Kenneth Walsh later said, knowing what to do with a Zero on his tail saved his life several times. Rear Admiral William Leonard called it a treasure. No other captured machine ever revealed so much when the need was so great. Even Japanese historians later admitted the loss was as severe as that of Midway. The lessons learned also shaped design. Grumman's F6F Hellcat, already in prototype, was refined with knowledge gained from the Akutan Zero. Heavier, faster, with 2,000 horsepower and full pilot protection, it was built to dominate where the Zero faltered, in high-speed vertical combat. By early 1943, the Hellcat entered service, and within a year, American pilots flying Hellcats and Corsairs had achieved overwhelming superiority. By mid-1944, in battles like the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Japanese air power was decimated. Hundreds of Zeros shot down, their inexperienced pilots unable to match the new, better-trained Americans. The once mighty Zero had become obsolete, its light frame and unarmored design turning from advantage to liability in a long war of attrition. Japanese engineers tried to adapt, adding armor and thicker glass to later A6M5 variants, but their engines lacked the power to compensate for the extra weight. The aircraft grew slower, less agile, and no longer competitive. The story of the Akutan Zero became a parable in engineering philosophy. When Japan's Navy first issued its fighter requirements in 1937, designer Jiro Horikoshi had faced impossible demands. Long range, heavy armament, extreme climb performance, all with a limited engine. He met them by cutting everything not absolutely essential. No armor, no self-sealing tanks, minimal structure. The design reflected Japan's doctrine of attack. That victory would come through offense and sacrifice. American doctrine, by contrast, prioritized survival, attrition, and industrial endurance. American aircraft could afford to be heavier because American industry could produce them in vast numbers and retrieve their pilots alive to fight again. Japan's pilots, trained for years, were irreplaceable, and every lost Zero meant one more irreplaceable expert gone forever. After the war, captured Japanese engineers confirmed what the Akutan Zero had already revealed. Its vulnerabilities were not oversights, but deliberate choices. Horikoshi himself later wrote that armor was never required in the specifications. They designed for range and agility, not protection. American analysts concluded that this difference, philosophical as much as technical, had determined the outcome of the air war. The Zero had been the most maneuverable fighter of its age, but it was also the most fragile. British test pilot Captain Eric Brown called it a delight to fly, but a death trap to fight in. Even Eddie Sanders, who flew the captured plane many times, said it was the finest aircraft at low speed, but one he would never take into battle. One bullet, and you were finished. The fate of Tadayoshi Koga mirrored that flaw. He had done everything right, flown with skill and courage, but a single bullet through an oil line doomed him. His Zero, meant to be a weapon of dominance, became instead America's greatest teacher. From its wreckage came the knowledge that saved lives, shaped aircraft, and reversed the balance of power in the Pacific. In February 1945, the Akutan Zero was destroyed in a ground accident at North Island when a helldiver collided with it. An ignoble end for the plane that had once terrified the world. But by then its mission was complete. The intelligence it yielded lived on in every Hellcat, every Corsair, every American pilot who returned from combat alive because he knew what his enemy's aircraft could, and could not, do. The story of the Akutan Zero is not merely about an airplane. It is about the clash of philosophies, one valuing attack and sacrifice, the other protection and endurance. And in a war that became a test of industrial might and survival, it was the latter that prevailed. The Zero's capture proved that even the most feared weapon can conceal its own undoing, and that sometimes the key to victory lies not in building a stronger sword, but in learning where your enemy's blade is weakest.